Number 11. Why do you use the command line so much? You suck. Alright, Gadgeteers, welcome back. We're going to have a discussion about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, Linux, and in particular Fedora. So there are 11 questions that I get asked, or statements that are sent to me, and some of them are very interesting. So what we're going to do is talk through them. Now I want to point out that not all the questions are about Fedora. Some are about Linux in general. So that's why the name of the video says Fedora and Linux, not Fedora Linux. Okay? Without further ado, let's get started with question number 1. I'll go from the general to the more specific. This one I see a lot. What got you into Linux in the first place? Now, originally I was purely a DOS Windows guy. You have to go all the way back to the 1980s. 86, 87, 88. I was learning and experimenting about different DOS operating system versions, and I had just got my own computer in 1990, which was a 486 SX25, I believe. It was actually an IBM chip. And I really didn't know anything about Linux. It only happened much, much later, about 5 or 10 years in the future, where I learned about Linux. And that was because at work, we had started making servers that were running Linux, and we had a few that were running Unix. So I needed to know what was going on. My coworkers started showing me more and more about Linux and Unix in general. And slowly but surely, as I moved up in position and eventually I became a director, although it was the kind of director that was very hands-on, so I got to work with the technology, directly. What I found was the percentage of Windows servers continued to drop while the percentage of Linux servers continued to increase. By about 2003, 2004, we only had one Unix server, about 80% Linux servers, and the rest were Windows. But the Windows servers were going away fast because many of the vendors that we were working with were supporting Linux only. So they were taking their web apps and converting them to be pretty much Linux only. So you didn't have any choice. You had to move from Windows to Linux. So at about that same time, I decided, the best way to learn more about Linux is to change operating systems altogether, even on my workstation like I have here. So I put Fedora on my workstation. I had experimented with Red Hat before, and we did have a Red Hat subscription because we were a nonprofit, but I wanted to try Fedora. And I liked Fedora, and I'm glad I chose it because it was definitely above the curve, so to speak. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It was ahead of the curve, so you usually got newer packages than you did with Red Hat. So Red Hat was like the stable release, and Fedora at that point was still kind of like the cutting edge release. Now the other reason is really a personal one. Linux reminds me of the good old days. It reminds me of the kind of the Wild West DOS Windows 3.11 days where everything was in a text file and you could configure just about anything, including the hardware. There was no automatic hardware assignment. You had to actually go into each of the individual cards in your computer, like a modem, and change dip switches to assign IRQ and port and whatever. So it definitely was the Wild West. I really liked that feeling, and you have to admit, I've got to admit, Linux is that, because when you look at the more refined Mac operating system and you look at Windows, which still has problems, but overall is very well refined, and it's not the walled garden that Mac is, but you definitely are getting your handheld more often, where Linux, again, it's the Wild West. It's up to you to figure things out. I had an issue with my ThinkPad P1 laptop that I had to figure out. The issue was essentially that it wouldn't enter sleep mode when you close the lid. And I'm thinking, what is that all about? Ends up, it's the USB bus stays hot. So if you have anything plugged into it, if that USB device wakes up your computer, which could be instantly, basically it would go to sleep and then wake up. So it wasn't too difficult to figure out. With a little bit of patience and research, it took about an hour, and I got it figured out. That's question one. Number two, this one, I see it all the time. It's either a statement or a question. You can't really do any productive work in Linux, can you? Or you can't do anything productive in Linux, or I play games, so you can't do anything productive in Linux. Well, my response to that is very short and very simple. You can't do any productive work in Linux, but I can do plenty of productive work in Linux. So when we define the word productive or I can't play games, it depends what games you're talking about and whether or not I want to play them. So that doesn't count for me, or whether or not the applications that I use I consider productive. So right now I'm using OBS to record this. I'm going to use the built-in, well, it's not built-in, but I'm going to use Kdenlive to actually edit the video, and so on and so forth. I use LibreOffice. I don't need Office that much anymore, so although that's not the main reason, I use it because I don't have to pay for it. And that really is nice. So thinking about what I can do, I'm actually very productive. Now, I will admit I don't play as many games, and I believe in using a suitable tool for its purpose. So if you like to play games and Windows supports most of the games and does the best job, use Windows. There's lots of videos out there about people saying, yes, but Linux can support this game and this game. All you have to do is configure this and do that. Well, I will grant that that is true, but most gamers don't want to go through the laborious effort of getting a game working. And so that's where they come up with the Windows plays games best, Linux doesn't play games. And I tend to agree. So use the most fit tool for the purpose. Games, Windows. Productivity, in my case, Linux. Can I use different high-profile applications like Adobe stuff? No. Do I care? No, I really don't. I get what I've got in applications works perfectly fine in the Linux universe and in Fedora, so I don't have to worry about that. Question number 3, why do you use Fedora? Isn't Ubuntu better? Well, no, not in my opinion anyway. I think Fedora is better, and it all depends on what you need the tool for. If you're just getting started in Linux, there's certainly no reason not to use Ubuntu, and if you like it, and you want to stick with it, go for it. There's two things that I don't like about Ubuntu. One is that it's owned by a corporation, and that corporation has compromised some of the software that's built into Ubuntu for monitoring purposes, telemetry and so on, much like Windows has, well, I should say Microsoft has with Windows 10. So that really concerns me, and I decided, I think I'm just going to move away from Ubuntu. Well, I only use it a few times, to be honest. I've been with Fedora forever and a day, and Red Hat before that. But I decided it wasn't the operating system for me, and I wanted to use Fedora instead. Some of you may say, but isn't Fedora a part of Red Hat, and isn't Red Hat owned by IBM now? Yes, it is. Am I concerned? Somewhat. Am I going to switch my Linux version? Probably not. If I was going to switch my Linux version, what would I go to? And this is a bonus question. Probably Debian. All right. Number 4. Isn't Fedora an unstable experimental distribution? No. Okay, you're still here. Not at all. They have regular releases every 6 months. The operating system is well built, very, very, very stable, and very reliable. I could leave my system running for pretty much as long as I want, and I have before. When I had a workstation with Fedora on it at work, I would just leave it running all the time. I never had to reboot it. There were a couple of times when you do need to reboot it, and that is something that we're going to talk about in a later question. But in essence, if you do updates that affects the GUI or certain applications, of course you would want to reboot it, because you either have to restart the app or the GUI or reboot the system. So in that case, I would reboot. So it is not experimental. It is cutting edge. That would be accurate. Meaning that you get the newest, latest packages as they become available, versus Red Hat or CentOS, where you don't. The idea there is server stability. So it's a whole different ball of wax. Question number 5. I've heard great things about Debian. Why aren't you using that? Well, I'm going to quote Chris at Titus Tech on this one. He says the out-of-box experience is horrible. Now, he does go on to say that once you get it set up, it's actually not bad at all. And he's able to do everything he wants to do in Debian. Now, I don't have a whole lot of experience with Debian, so I don't know all the different release not versions, but releases and how everything works, so I would have to get up to speed on that. I would need something pretty fresh, so I couldn't just go with Debian Stable. I'd have to have something that was definitely much more advanced as far as package management and package updates. So with Fedora, the out-of-box experience is really, really good. I'm able to set up Fedora, install Fedora, I should say, update Fedora, and install my applications in about an hour. I want to say on a regular basis, but I back up my home directory for my user, which is Mark. And in the home directory, of course, if you know anything about Linux, is basically everything for your users. And each user has a specific folder. So I just grab the home folder and I put in a 4 terabyte drive, and I drag it over and just do basically a backup. So if I run into problems, I have it, and then I take that backup and put it on a 4 terabyte portable drive, so I have another copy. So I could take this computer, wipe it out, start from scratch, and have it up and running in an hour. The cool thing is, so Fedora 30 is out right now. The computer that I'm on right now, my 2700X AMD, actually is on Fedora 28. In another video coming up, I'm going to try and upgrade it to Fedora 30. I'm going to try and jump 29 and go straight to 30. If I blow it up, it doesn't really matter to me, because I'll have backed up my home directory and I can just do a clean install. 6. Isn't CentOS better to use than Fedora? Well, I think we've already visited this topic. Depends what you want to do with it. CentOS is really an operating system that's designed for server-side type stuff, just like Red Hat is. Yes, you can use it as a workstation. Yes, I have tried to use it as a workstation. Why didn't I stay with it as a workstation? Well, unfortunately, package-wise, the packages that are available are much, much older. So Kdenlive, for example, the editor, the package is very old, so a lot of the new features that you get in a more fresh version of Kdenlive aren't available. So can you get it? Yes. Do I want to go through all that work knowing that I might destabilize CentOS when I do it? No. I would rather have Fedora where the package was designed for Fedora and is up to date. What do you have to do to get Fedora up and running quickly after the installation? So, of course, installation step 1. And then there's 3 critical steps that I do after. 1 is immediately do an update. 2 is set up my repositories. And 3 is install the packages I need. So Fedora out of the gate, like many of the Linux distros, have certain repositories that they will support that are the so-called free and open source. So Fedora has one itself, for example. And then there's the non-free, like RPM Fusion, where you can get things that are not open source software and they are free, but they aren't open source. So I set up different repositories and then I install the packages. Now I've got several videos on an install, and I probably will have another one coming along shortly because I'm going to upgrade this main system to Fedora 30. So stick around for that. Number 8. What's your preferred desktop environment? Where can I get the cool customizations you use? Well, I use KDE, so the KDE desktop is my preferred desktop. Now, I've done videos about customizations and how to do it. One of the things I like about the KDE desktop is basically almost all the customizations that I've done are built into the GUI. So if you go into System Settings and Explore, you'll find several different ways to update things like changing desktops, different Windows appearance, so you can have different buttons and looks. You can use a theme that's a dark background. Right now I've got kind of a mix, but you pretty much can have whatever you want. It's all built into KDE, so you don't have to hunt and peck. And it's a little bit more difficult in my experience, not very difficult, because there are changes I also do in other desktops when I install them as well. It just, for me, using KDE seems the simplest. The other thing is KDE supports the applications that I use most. One of the big ones is Kdenlive. Surely you can use it in other desktop environments, but it looks best in KDE because it was really made to be used with KDE. That doesn't mean you have to do what I do. I'm just telling you what I like, and I'm in Kdenlive, the app, most of the time, so really that's the one that I like. The other thing is KDE is much easier to set up for 4K monitors, so scaling seems to work much better, even though you do have to pretty much manually set it up. But it scales not only the operating system but the applications, much like Windows 10 does, so you only have to do one job. Now, in other desktop environments, it will scale the desktop environment, but it will not scale the application. So in the case of, say, Firefox, you will be able to see all the buttons. They'll all be the correct size and everything, but the content inside is tiny, 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 and then you have to scale it up using Control Plus to like 150, 200%. And the problem with that is when you then go to a different computer that uses a 1080p monitor, Firefox remembers those settings for that page and the text is huge, so you have to shrink it back down. KDE, on the other hand, scales everything, and it's just so much easier for me to use KDE for that reason and application support. How often do you do updates? Well, it all depends. Now, this computer here is running Fedora 28. I haven't done updates on it for quite a while. Let's see if I can find out how many updates I'm due. 463 updates. So quite a few. So why haven't I done the updates on this computer? Well, the main reason is everything is fully functional right now, and as you know, I had quite a hiatus with my video production, so I didn't want to do any updates just yet. I wanted to make this video, get it in the can, so to speak. That's an old filmmaking term. You probably don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, get it in the can, go look it up. And I could take the video, make a backup of it, update the computer. If I blow away Kdenlive, no problem. I've got my ThinkPad P1. It's all ready to go. I can just go ahead and edit on that computer. So I'll have a backup of the video, no worries. Otherwise, normally I do updates more often. I try to actually keep up with updates, do it every couple days, because many times when things don't work, if you do an update, you'll find that that particular issue will be fixed. What would be an example? I had a problem with GovCView. Basically, that, of course, is the video camera control software. All of the different settings were actually missing for my 4K Brio camera that I use on this computer. And I thought, okay, well, I could try to figure it out and go through the work, but I think I'll just wait till tomorrow and see what happens. I ran updates, and lo and behold, the updates were there, and all the settings for the 4K Brio camera were back. So my recommendation is, if you're staying up with updates, that's a good thing. If you don't do updates very often, even though Fedora is very stable, I do recommend getting any particular production work out of the way, or having a backup system that you could do your work on if you needed to. It's the same with Windows 10. It's not because it's Fedora. I do the same thing with Windows 10. I have two computers that run Windows 10. I now only have one Mac, but I have an older one just in case. So it's just simple smarts, just simple logic. You're going to have a backup system of some sort if you're doing production work. It doesn't matter what operating system you're on. Number 10. Why is your computer on an older release of Fedora? Well, I think we've already went over that. In particular, my production computer here, I just started using it again after several months, so I wanted to get some work done. Then I'm going to run the update, see if everything's still working, and then I plan on updating it to Fedora 30, because right now my laptop's on Fedora 29 and it's doing perfectly fine. One of my viewers made another comment saying, well, he probably stays behind just for stability's sake, and that's actually a good point. At some level, at some point, the Fedora project stops doing major package updates to a particular release and changes over to security releases. So Fedora 28 is only getting security releases, and shortly it won't be getting that either, because they only support, I want to say 2+ active releases, so about a year and a half, 2 years. And once Fedora 31 comes out, I don't think 28 is going to be supported anymore, maybe with some security releases. So of course I'll want to move forward before that. One other thing to consider is, when you're on an older version of Fedora, say I'm on Fedora 29 on my laptop, the current version is Fedora 30, and there's a major release of some software, it is possible, more than likely, you will not see that major release. You would have to upgrade to the current version of Fedora in order to see it. Is that a problem? No. In some ways it makes sense, because remember, the kernel is being developed at the same time, and the kernel supports certain new functionality in Fedora, which may or may not translate into certain functionality in applications that expect that newer kernel with those newer functions. Complicated, but that's the way it is. Number 11. Why do you use the command line so much? You suck. I know, I'm not that great, but Why do I use the command line so much? I literally get comment after comment. One of my favorite ones was something like, started watching your video, saw you use command line, immediately stopped watching video, will not watch any more of your videos. Man, that's harsh. That's really harsh. It hurts my feelings. But anyway, I'll live with it. Okay, so there's two main reasons I will use the command line. But before we get into those, let's talk about the philosophy of the command line. You just have to face the facts that with Linux, you're going to have to do something in the command line. It's just the way it is. It's Linux. You can't get around it. I'm sorry. I would like to say yes, you can, but you just can't. Users who are on Ubuntu are probably going to drop comments saying, I've been on Ubuntu for 10 years and I've never rebooted my computer and never needed the command line. Congratulations. Good for you. I'm glad to hear it. Although I don't believe you because, well, quite frankly, I know better. You, in that case, would be one of the people who runs into a problem and just throws your hands up and gives up and goes back to Windows 10 or Mac. I've heard that more than enough times. Oh, I'm so frustrated with Linux. I can't do what I need to do anymore. I have to go back to Windows. I'm just going to give up on using Linux as my production machine. It's just too frustrating. You never tried any of the options or suggestions to use the command line. So that brings me to my first point. Sometimes I'm forced to use the command line out of necessity. And basically what that means is you just have to, because that is the fix for the given problem that you have researched. Research. That's the other thing users don't like. But unfortunately, sometimes you have to do that. You have to go and do research. You have to figure it out. And you might have to use the command line and enter a few commands in to get what you want working the way you want. If you want to install NVIDIA drivers in many of the releases, most of the time you have to be dropped down to the command line to get those drivers installed. And if you get a kernel update, you also will have to drop down to the command line to install the newest, well, you don't have to install the newest driver version, but you may have to recompile and install your current driver version at the very least to work with the new kernel that came out. That is not the case with all the NVIDIA drivers and all the Linux distros out there. So I don't want to say it's blanket that way, but most likely is. And the last reason, it's what I'm used to from prior training. Much of the work that I had to do, if you go all the way back to the DOS days, was on the command line. If you look at Windows, I still use the command line. If you look at Linux, all of my development and training in Linux was command line based. None of my servers ran a GUI. GUIs basically present new problems and vulnerabilities to your servers, so if you can get away with not running the GUI, you're much more ahead of the curve and less likely to have a problem or have your server infiltrated. If you're somebody who doesn't like the command line, my advice is do Windows 10 or Mac. You're looking for the walled garden. You're looking for everything to work. You've paid for it. You expect it to do what you want to do. Again, we talked about it. Linux is the Wild West in some ways, and I really like that. I have fun, and I know many people say I don't have time to have my system be down. Well, neither do I. So I have a backup system just like I did when I was in Windows, just like I do when I'm using a Mac. So consider that when you see me using the command line. I try to go slow and be very patient so everybody can see and understand what I'm doing. Sometimes I get excited and I don't describe precisely what it is I'm doing, in which case if you drop me a comment I will try to elaborate, and sometimes I'll make a new video saying, hey, I wasn't clear on this part, I'm going to redo it so that it's more logical and easier to understand. So that's it. The 11 questions I get asked most of the time about Fedora and Linux. And I wanted to make this video because it's more difficult to comment on all the different videos when these types of questions or comments come up. But I have this feeling it's still going to happen anyway. Thank you for watching. As always, I appreciate having you here. It's been great. I've been feeling pretty good, so for now I'm back. For those who are still here, I do have to have a heart catheterization coming up on the 5th, which will tell whether or not my heart has gotten worse, and if so, how much, and what the next level of treatment is. But right at this moment, I'm feeling very good. I consider it a major blessing, and I'm trying to remain happy, upbeat, and positive. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Fast Gadgets. This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/FastGadgets.